Hello and welcome to the Be Formless Flow Driven CEO podcast, where we are reshaping life, leadership, and business from the inside out. And today I'm welcoming all the way from Denver, Colorado, Jacob Chase. Welcome to the show, Jacob.
Thanks, Bea. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I have been to Denver. We've talked about skiing and the different mountains I've been to. And I think are you a skier? I can't remember whether you said you were or you weren't.
I snowboard,
That's right,
yep.
snowboard. Yeah,
And so
yeah.
born and raised here, and you can't be from here and not know how. So
Totally. What's your favorite? Which mountain's your favorite?
we do a lot of Vail. We got married. My wife and I got married in Vail,
How cool.
and that's where we like to spend our time.
Yeah, okay, there you go. Yeah, I've done Steamboat,
Yeah,
Telluride, yeah, a few of those,
those are some of the best.
Silverton, is it Silverton? That crazy mountain? Like with
Yeah,
one of the yeah, it's wild. Anywho. And you just on that, you're married and you've got 3 kids, right?
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah. Wow, there you
they're
go.
young. We have a 4-year-old daughter, and she has 2 older brothers, 8 and 9, and so we have a crazy house right now.
Yeah, how cute. How cute. Well, welcome to the show. It's good to have you. It's Thursday afternoon in Denver, and it's happy Friday morning here in Melbourne, Australia, where it is freezing this morning. Like it is, we're kind of hitting the winter vibes, and you're starting to move into the summer vibes. And today is epically cold. Big shout out to the listeners as well. Hello, everybody. We've got an action-packed pod today. And so, yeah, do share any feedback that or questions that you have as well. So let's get into it, Jacob. You are the founder and CEO at The INFIN. We'll come back to that brand name later. I haven't asked you how that name came about, where you bring investment strategy to human capital. Really interesting, investment strategy to human capital. And Jacob, your work explores a question sitting underneath both business and human behavior. How do we actually recognize value inside organizations? It's quite funny because value can be such a buzzword, can't it? In terms of it's like culture, right? Value can sit there from a values perspective, but then there's also the value exchange. So I'll be really intrigued to hear how you actually recognize value inside organizations. You started your career in Wall Street during the financial crisis back in 2008, before then moving into real estate, investing in technology. And then you became increasingly interested in how systems reward contribution and how often the people creating real value remain unseen within them. So as founder and CEO of The INFIN, you're building tools designed to bring greater visibility into the human contribution, whereby helping companies better understand where value is being created, who is creating it, and how performance of people are ultimately connected. I love that. Your perspective challenges traditional ideas around, I've got to get this word right, meritocracy, meritocracy, leadership and success, asking whether modern systems are truly rewarding the behaviours they claim to value. And when you booked in for the pod and I asked you what's one unique insight or lived experience when it comes to life, leadership and or business and how you're reshaping it, you said understanding that the best way to serve yourself is by serving others.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a bit about your journey. And you started INFIN back in November 2024. Have I got that right?
Yeah, it was a slow burn at first. I'd never done anything in tech before, and so had to make a lot of mistakes firsthand before you kind of learn how to actually
Yeah.
build software and technology. So it took us a little while, but we've got our feet under us now, and are learning a lot with the people that we're serving.
Yeah, awesome. So tell us a bit, tell us how you went from Wall Street. Well, no, firstly, let's start with what was it like to be in Wall Street, starting in Wall Street in a financial crisis?
Well, I mean, I felt incredibly lucky. So I was working at an investment bank called Lazard, which was they had a big restructuring arm. And so what this investment bank did was help companies kind of go through bankruptcy or reorganize their financial obligations, their debts and credits. And it was just like the most incredible time to be there, where they were, a very well-renowned firm doing big transactions. And, I'm a fresh out of college, sitting in a boardroom, doing the analysis for a deal to get cut that I'm reading on the front page of the Wall Street Journal the next day. And I was just in awe at every moment that I got to be a part of. We worked really hard. But I had some great people that I worked for, and I just learned a ton.
Yeah, awesome.
And those early years were a grind, but I was felt like I was in the best position I could possibly be in finance during that economic period. And, uh, it was a great 2 years, and then that rolled into a distressed credit hedge fund position, at a firm called Angelo Gordon thereafter for another 8 years.
Yeah,
And,
wow.
it was a really awesome experience. Really got to understand, a lot of different kinds of businesses, understand how capital flows in the economy. I lived in London for a couple of years and got a bit more of a global perspective as well, and it was just I couldn't imagine a better way to kinda jump off in a career.
Did you ever think at that point you would start your own company, like be a founder yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole time, I never wanted to grow up to be my boss. I always wanted to, start my own thing and blaze my own trail for sure. And so kind of towards the end of that, me and a buddy just started buying some real estate back in Denver. And it kind of became the side hustle that grew up and brought me back to Colorado from kind of the big financial capitals that where I was living and built a diversified real estate business for 8 years and really kind of learned firsthand how to grow from a standing start, how to, become a better leader myself, learn how to manage teams, the structure and organization required to do so. And, as we started getting, above 100 people towards 150, really started asking myself important questions about like, how do we actually, recognize and reward the people who are making a difference in our organization? And that was just a rabbit hole that kind of set me on my current path.
Yeah. Also, tell us about the rabbit hole. Like, was it because like investment strategy, human contribution, value, like,
Yeah,
yeah, like what are you talking? And then that meritocracy. Gosh, it's a real tongue twister that one. Like, I keep going to say mediocrity.
definitely not that.
No.
Well, look, I can remember a specific kind of incident when I was running the real estate business where we had an accounts payable guy, the a specialist, a low level contributor. The job market said he was worth $55,000 a year, but he was a total rock star, total outperformer across the board in every category you could imagine. He was way above and beyond his job description, very kind of highly interconnected node within the organization, always helped everybody, was a cultural torchbearer and like all of the things that you really want to emphasize and encourage and reward within an organization. And, the question I was trying to answer was like, well, how do you figure out how much to pay this guy? It's like, what is his contribution really worth to our organization? And that was kind of the inciting incident that got me thinking about a lot of these topics. Um, and the first thing that it really challenged me for was that it wasn't just my perspective that mattered. So I'm the CEO of this organization, but I didn't see everything that he did. But through reputation, through the grapevine, it was very obvious that he did a lot. And, really challenging the perspective that like, well, my perspective is the only one that matters, really started to open my eyes to other ways to kind of evaluate talent and evaluate contribution.
And so then, so like, how different is like what you're doing, like, or what you were exploring? Because we'll come to infin in a minute. Like, were you noticing like there was more, like, what was broken in the traditional system, I guess, if you like, and you were like, was it that you could go online and find, like you say, that guy that was what his actual salary should be versus what actually he brings to the business, his contribution in terms of when you talk about human contribution, it's skills, it's hard and soft skills, even though I hate calling out hard and soft skills. Like, it's more than just that though. Like, is that what you like? Yeah. What's the difference? What were you noticing that was broken? Was it that?
With it, I mean, that's definitely part of it, right? Where, a traditional assessment system is highly centralized, where you have kind of fixed criteria upon which folks are rated. Maybe it's specific to their job, maybe it's, kind of general for everybody. There's a fixed scale at which people are rated. And I just found that very lacking because we had those traditional systems, but they didn't recognize over contribution. And oftentimes they didn't recognize under contribution either, where there's a kind of a political incentive for self promotion or grade inflation, where, you know, some leader wouldn't want to kind of penalize anyone on their team. And there were all sorts of kind of dynamics at play where the information you get out of it just wasn't that good. And, it was great that we're able to provide people feedback. People were hungry for feedback, but it wasn't really actionable from an executive perspective. It didn't, really give us an understanding of how people are contributing to business success. There's no kind of, financial component attached to it. And, I really found that lacking. And, that traditional centralized system was what I really ultimately ended up challenging. And for one that's much more decentralized, right? Where everybody in the organization has a perspective of what's going on, who's contributing to the team, who's not. And when you begin to aggregate that information, you can get some real system level intelligence, kind of far beyond a traditional 360 review, but in a way that is much more kind of provides much more personalized feedback for each individual, but also enables you to connect it to the business performance in a way that I hadn't seen before.
Yeah, it's really interesting you pulling this out because, like, when I think about, the previous world I was in and the system we use, and there was a team called the remuneration, and I can't remember exactly reward and remuneration team, and they were attached to the HR department. And, as managing director, CEO of the company, we had to, with my leaders, we would score our staff and put them almost into a box. And there was like a score out of 5. And I used to hate it. And the leadership team used to hate it also because it just wasn't giving an actual real time analysis of actually how the people had performed. And so you'd go in and score them, and then you get the departments, the HR and the reward and remuneration team going, well, no, 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 you're going to need to drop them down. And they're not even interacting with them. And it became almost like a cost cutting exercise. And it just used to really, so you'd be like going then having to go back to the team and, and even my leadership team, I'd be doing with the leadership team. And they were being scored on just this, like, what I would see as like a really false scoring system,
Yeah.
which was always disappointing. And I'm sure, they must still all exist today. Like, I mean, obviously you're reshaping the status quo. There must be some really old systems that still are in businesses today and completely so old world, it's not funny.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the status quo, and I think that is, like, the only method that folks are really using right now, to a large degree, but everyone acknowledges there's similar dissatisfactions where, it's not accurate enough, it's not actionable enough, it's not meaningful enough to
Yes.
really make a
Mm,
difference.
mm.
But it's kind of the best that we've had for 25 years. And I think we all kind of acknowledge it's time to improve and change. And you made one really interesting point about how, all of the categories that people were rated on didn't necessarily apply. And, so I'm an ex-finance guy, right? And so I still kind of think in finance terms. And, because a lot of those categories miss the intangibles that really matter. Like you can't always put a metric to everything. But, you look to kind of institutions that do that well, that capture the intangibles. And the best one is the market system, where, you have a bunch of diverse perspectives participating in a market that ultimately yields a price, right? So you've
Mm.
got your value investors and your short sellers and your day traders and your quants and all of the different people who are trying to, establish their view of value that ultimately yields a solution. And that solution captures all of the intangibles from all of the participants, right? So like, every public company posts its financials quarterly. And so you have the underlying data, but two companies with the exact same underlying data can still have wildly different market values based on the intangibles that are assessed by the markets. Like, is the CEO honest and trustworthy? Do they have good industry tailwinds? There's all sorts of things beyond just the data. And so, where the perspective that we take is that it's much more important to establish the price and then deconstruct it into the components of value rather than starting with the components of value and reconstructing that into,
Mm,
the definition of success. And,
so true.
and I think that that's, um, an interesting diversion from the status quo that people are typically doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole HR, and I'm not suggesting yours is HR. Like, it's the whole human contribution, the people piece is really up for grabs if you ask me at the moment in businesses. Like, and how do we reshape it and redefine it in a way that works for what the future of work looks like, if you like. Tell us a little bit about, so you're in real estate, you do that for 8 years, you're seeing something, you've got an idea percolating, you're almost like like practicing's the wrong word. You're almost testing the waters out in the real estate
Yeah.
business. So what happens? Like you come out of real estate and then did something, what made you move then from real estate and go, all right, I'm gonna start infin? Like, was there something that took place, or you were just like, I want to focus on this now?
Well, I mean, we built a prototype of our current system for use in that real estate business.
Yeah.
And, it was, um, not nearly, like, it wasn't a fully baked product by any means, but we just got fascinating results instantly. And,
What
good
sort of
data.
results?
Well, I mean, the first thing that stood out is, so we did a test company wide. And the first thing that stood out when we had zero expectations was we saw in the data we had two underperforming managers in the field that we didn't know about. It instantly stood out in the data. Lo and behold, you go do a little bit of digging, and their entire teams were flight risks, and a lot of intervention was required. And, that was really kind of another light bulb moment of, okay, like, this information is real. And, and it's sent signal that we weren't getting from our position. But obviously all of, the company saw it happening. The people who are local to that incident, those people were observing this. And when we get their perspective, it shows up in the data in this kind of internal market system. And
Really interesting. Sorry, Jacob, just on that, just to pause for a second. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because you implement this system, or you're prototyping it. You see some really interesting data. I always find this fascinating, and yeah, and there's a team that are flight risk, and they're not raising their hand, like they're not saying there's problems. I'm sure that surely was a factor in how you continue to build out this prototype, because you're kind of like, like, why aren't they saying anything? Why aren't they speaking up? Like, what's going on here?
sure.
Like, mm,
Well, absolutely. I mean, like, part of it was proximity. And, these were at, locations away from headquarters where we didn't have as much daily interactivity, and the information flows that bubbled up were filtered by the very people who were the problems. And so that just didn't reach us in the way that it needed to. Um, but kind of in progressing the story a little bit, the real estate markets turned in kind of 2022, 2023, and just kind of realized I didn't want to be a real estate guy when I grew up. And so sold out of that business. But this human side really stuck with me, and thought it was worth pursuing as its own standalone thing.
did you take any time out? Like, you've sounds like you've had quite the career. Well, you clearly have. And like, was there any time where you were just like, I just need a break. I just want to actually sit with this and see what comes up and how this can form in a way that, becomes, your next business venture as such, or were you just straight on into it?
I mean, there were definitely some periods of lower intensity. Kind of after exiting the real estate business, some parts of the business had long tails to kind of get out of, and so there's still a lot of attention there. But really, like I've said, like, the first year of really building a product wasn't very fast. It wasn't very intense. I had to learn how to be technical, or learn how to actually build good software where I, was starting from zero. And that took a long time, and, still a work in progress, but it enabled me to not have my feet to the fire the whole time for sure. You know, some ideas just don't let you go, and I was pretty convinced that this was the next move for myself.
Some ideas don't let you go. They just keep coming back at you. It happens to me sometimes where I'm just like, I'm done. You know, when you have those days where you're just like, I can't, I'm exhausted. This is like, especially when you're learning something like you're talking about learning about software and tech. And it's an interesting observation because here you are, you're in the grind of it and you have your moments where nothing's working and you step away and you're like, no. And then all of a sudden that idea, it just keeps coming back at you. It's just like, there's something a bit spiritual, if you like, or
Sure.
just meant to be in a way for me because it happens to me and I'm sure it happens to a lot of founders because, recently someone said to me, entrepreneurship is a superpower. And I went, yeah, it so is because you just stick at it at times when something just keeps like the idea just does not go away. It's a great phrase that you've just called out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? And every entrepreneur knows that there are really trying times, and you have to have a lot of conviction in order to kind of push yourself through. Having an idea that doesn't let you go, I think helps to give you some of that conviction.
Yeah. So okay. So tell us. So you have a year. So when did the name come to fruition? Like Infin. Like how did you come up with Infin? Tell us a little bit more about Infin. What you're doing now. The building. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so you know, going back to the idea of meritocracy, right? When you
Yes.
really align individual success with collective success, when the best way to serve yourself is by serving something greater than yourself,
Mm,
which I think is really the fundamental premise of meritocracy. It really unlocks the infinite possibility of human collaboration.
mm,
And, the infin is just short for the infinite possibility of human collaboration. And that's kind of where it came from. And, you know, the prefix, like everyone has seen the Facebook movie where they dissed on the, and we're trying to bring the back. And just to make it stand out a little bit more.
yeah, I love that. I love it. It's such a great. It's like that individual and the collective. I agree with you. It's you can't flourish as an individual. It's like the individual, the team, and the business, and how that all interconnects together to get the value you want out of the business, also the commercial success is it's a total human contribution. And I think that quite often we get so caught up in our own individual ego and me, 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 me. I was talking to a client about this yesterday, hearing about a few staff, and I was just like, they're not team players. Like they're just not.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, let's go back to, kind of the alignment of the individual and the collective success, right?
Mm,
So it's really the success of the business that determines the size of the pie. It's like how much is there to go around to share with all of the contributors, and so the team has to be successful in order to even have a pie, and
yeah,
it has to improve if it's going to grow the pie.
yeah,
And so ultimately, what you want to figure out is how big is each person's slice. And, that is kind of the core output of what we do is your proportionate share of contribution. And so when you have a team self-assessing, so everyone starts on the same level, who's doing X% of what, then you get a distribution that can actually give you the individual share of contribution. And the fascinating, and like these are kind of happy accidents that happen along the way. One fascinating thing was that, as soon as one person changes one perspective on someone else, even just a little bit, it recalculates the solution for the entire network. And
yeah,
so there's like quite literally a ticker, just like in the stock market, of your peer reviewed performance as judged by everyone around you. And, and they're just really, positive feedback dynamics of having this insight about your performance, about what you're doing that other people are depending upon, that you need to improve or continue doing, that just helps to continue to reinforce the behaviors that align with collective success.
Yeah, I love
And,
it.
yeah,
So how does it work? So like I come to you, is it generally do you generally get businesses that come to you with a problem in their business and not seeing their results? Like how does your actual system work? Or is it people looking for, or businesses I should say, looking for a fresh new way to understand human capital contribution in their business? Because this is quite new language in terms of, like, again, coming back to the traditional, like what you're talking about here is conscious capital, conscious human contribution. It's not just always like profit, and commercial is obviously a key.
sure.
You're flipping it somewhat. You're bringing the human contribution and the commercial together.
Yeah, I mean, in my view, they're really inseparable, right? Because
Yeah.
you need the collective success in order to,
For the
you know,
business to succeed. Yeah,
in order, to share with the contributors.
yeah,
And, you need the human kind of a self-assessment of the group in order to determine how each person is contributing. And I think that there's a really important incentive difference between kind of we'll call it the traditional way of assessment, where when you have a centralized assessment, there's often a political incentive where you know exactly the criteria that you've got to meet. You self promote a little bit to, get a little inflation yourself. Maybe you hold down some competition. And there's an underlying political incentive when it's centralized. But when it's decentralized, when everybody has sway over everybody else, the incentive is to serve. The way that you get value in this system is by serving your teams. And it really promotes some kind of high performing team dynamics, like the dynamics that are like innate in high performing teams where there's a service orientation, there's a subordination of self interest and that kind of thing. But when you quantify it and you incentivize it, it brings out that behavior kind of across teams. And you're about to say something.
No, I was going to say, yeah, it's really interesting again. Like, is this like, when you talk about decentralizing, this is also like decentralizing the hierarchy, right? Because a lot of businesses, and again, coming back to the business previously, it was always every time we had a pulse survey or this remuneration and rewards, I guess, assessment, if you like, you could always see the politics playing through because it was always like, if you don't complete your survey, if you don't complete your um, questionnaire or whatever, we're going to turn your emails off. And it was, you could always see it was like there was someone always like pushing this because they were going to get their big chunky bonus for being the best in the world to have everyone complete this. And yet everyone was just like so disengaged in it. And it's interesting that you're calling this out because it's actually deconstructing this, I guess, leadership structure as we know it also. So it brings more equality and everyone's on like an even playing field, if you like. It comes back to individual and then collective contribution, not leader. It's not like a top down. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just a really,
100%.
yeah, I love it. Yeah.
100%. And
Mm,
so there's some interesting comments to that. So in this kind of self-assessment system, value naturally accrues to leadership. Like
mm,
the leader of the team should be seen as having the highest contribution. And that cascades up throughout a hierarchy. And it gets really obvious when that's not the case. And that's exactly what happened when we did the prototype with my real
mm.
estate business, is that value was not accruing to leadership in the way that it was elsewhere. And so we instantly knew where to look. And another important component of that, so everyone starts on a level playing field, leaders, CEO down to the intern, all the same. And everyone's got their perspective of who's contributing based on what they see. But not all, and this is another happy accident, not all perspectives count equally. Where you think of, a CEO thinks, business performance is generally what is expected of the leadership team and the people who are on in the circle of the CEO. But that new intern who just joined, what's important to them, what's valuable to them is a good boss that helps them learn the ropes, our peers that help them get integrated into the organization. And those are very valuable things that aren't captured in a traditional assessment, but they're incorporated in the diffusion of value. But those perspectives are not weighted equally. They're weighted according to your proportionate share of contribution as judged by everyone else. And so the more highly esteemed you are, the more weight your perspective has. And, but the less esteemed you are, your perspective still counts, but it only grows in weight as your contribution grows.
Mm. Okay, so a few final questions for you. In terms of, so you do the you do the assessment. Do you call it an assessment? What do you call it?
And implementation.
You say do the implementation. You get the results, then what happens? So, like, it's all there, like, the data's there. Like, is there resistance from leaders? Like, what are you observing? And what are, what are you noticing with this new way of
Yeah. So, I
assessing
mean,
contribution? And do people actually then follow through with it? Or, what's the success rate been like for you in terms of seeing the from to, if you like, in
sure.
completing your implementation in
So,
Fin?
um, I mean, the success rate is 100% so far. The implementation takes 5 minutes, right? And so there's not a lot of,
Yeah, that's cool.
stuff that's required, but it's designed to be ongoing in real time. And so that, the system asks you questions about the people that you're working with. And it also provides you feedback on in a more or less real time basis based on the observations of others. And, that part, people like there's a high validity of the feedback that people receive, knowing that it's from a decentralized kind of aggregation. Where it gets tricky is that initially, when you see your results, they may not align with your perspective, your then existing self-image. And, that can be a moment of tension for some people where they're actually getting kind of real feedback for the first time. And, but we've seen that people very quickly respond with the mentality of wanting to improve.
Yeah, great.
And across the board, people find the feedback valid. Like, just because it's not centralized, because it's an aggregated perspective of everybody, that they find it to be true. And, and I think that that's not always able to be said for a lot of the traditional systems where the political games and all that stuff kind of, degrades it a little bit.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Tell me a little bit about human intelligence like human intelligence, human contribution, and then the AI piece around, like, is AI playing a role in your system, like, in terms of the data, and like, I guess my question is, AI is huge. Like, I feel like I'm on repeat street with it. It's
Yeah.
everywhere.
Well,
Why I'm
so
pulling it apart all the time, though, is because there's this AI, there's the human piece is more important than ever. And so is the infin enabling also to really pull out the human contribution, the way you perform as a collective versus what the AI component can do? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
yeah, I think so. So, what's becoming more and more clear is that AI tools and resources are really kind of stratifying contribution, where
Mm,
like the people who are really diving in and really starting to use it and really amplifying their own productivity are becoming more and more valuable to an organization relative to the people who maybe not. And so figuring out kind of where on that, you know, um, in that spectrum you lie is really important. It's becoming more important as human contribution is stratifying. Where we incorporate AI is trying to make it easy on people to input information. Where, the questions that we're asking are hyper specific to you and that person, your relationship, whether it's a boss or a direct report or a peer in a different department, and really trying to make it hyper personalized to you. It also cleans everything for confidentiality so that, you know, everyone feels comfortable inputting what they really think rather than, needing to screen for fear of retribution or things like that. And so, there's a lot of AI enablement in the tool, but I think the most important application is really understanding who is increasing their contribution because of other tool AI usage as well that you can still measure in this sense.
Yeah, there's that human contribution and the AI contribution and, like the infinite possibilities coming out of both.
Yeah.
And just knowing how to, it's interesting. I think we spoke about this the other week. AI is part of the team also. So it's like, that you call it human contribution. It's like human, slash machine contribution in terms of, looking at that team holistically and in a decentralized way. I think it's really fascinating, and where you're taking the infin, it's interesting.
Well, so ultimately, at the end of the day, it's still human judgment, right?
100%,
it
100%.
it is humans evaluating their dependency or the
Yeah.
contribution of others.
Mm.
And so it's like that contribution may be enhanced or enabled more by AI usage, but it's still humans,
At the end of the day.
assessing humans at the end of the day. And I think that's really important to preserve at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I could not agree more. Jacob, so tell us, I'm going to pivot just slightly. Founder,
Yeah.
like, what's that like for you? Is it like, we were talking, I think, pre-show and, or maybe in the show, it's Friday, and it's like, so for me, how do you keep yourself going? Like in terms of you're building something, it's never easy. You're actually almost pioneering something that is, taking on the traditional, the status quo. And, quite often you get a lot of no's before yeses.
Yeah.
And you've got a grandiose mission. It's a big mission. Anything with human contribution in the mission is huge. Like, how do you keep going? And I guess it comes back to the idea, right? What do you do as a founder though to, yeah, preserve
Yeah.
your energy?
Um, yeah. I mean, it's hard, right? Like this stuff is not easy and you have to make a lot of mistakes the hard way. And, the learning aspect is really, I feel lucky that I really love to learn and that, I don't mind if mistakes happen, in the spirit of trying something new and, you get better from that. Um, you'd made a comment earlier about like other people reaching out to me for this. Like that doesn't happen yet. There's a lot of outreach. There's a lot of testing. There's a lot of connecting with folks who kind of understand the mindset of meritocracy and want it and are willing to take some risks in order to actually pursue that. And, it's really invigorating to see success with some of our clients where they're really, each person is learning something really important about themselves that they haven't heard before, but they know is meaningful and makes a difference in their careers. And those little moments give you a lot of fuel for the really hard moments that, seem like might not ever end. And it's just a focus on the mission, right? Do we want a world where people have more agency in determining their own success? And I think the answer is yes. And it's like if you give
Absolutely.
them that
Yeah.
information, you see how there's a direct line of sight into your improvements resulting in a bigger picture success that can then reinforce your own personal success. Like that's really the essence of what we're going for. And that, just talking about it gives me a lot of energy to
Yeah.
keep pursuing it.
Yeah. And, it's funny when you call out when you're doing a lot of outreach versus inbound coming in at the moment. It's the loneliness, it's the silence where you just like, you really have to question something. You have to really like check
Yeah.
yourself in terms of your mindset, and because you're like, is this going to get off the ground? Like, because it is something different, right? And it is challenging the status quo. And whenever you challenge the status quo, and this is one for the listeners and the audience, is that you have to be able to continue to step in the unknown. You have to have the courage. You have to be brave. You have to continually shape and reshape, keep forming and reforming the business, like pivoting in, and not like from a random perspective. And then, slowly but surely you get those inbounds where you're like, oh, like, and even if they don't come through, it's just still, you're starting to get what what you're building and what you're working towards. And I think that we sometimes just need to stop and remind ourselves of those moments also. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, look, I take a lot of um, learning from the case studies of most companies, most tech successes were you know fighting for survival for years and years before they
I
really
know.
unlocked it. And
Yeah.
then, but you're always wondering. It's like, well, is it just around the next corner? Is it just around the next corner? Or is it never going to be there? And those are really hard conversations to have with yourself.
Like,
Um,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's only one way to find out,
Yeah.
and that's to keep going.
Yeah. I love it. Jacob, thank you so much. How do we find out more about the Infin? How do we find out more about you? If we want to do a demo, if we want to do you offer demos, if we're interested in giving your product a go and, getting involved in meritocracy and, like you're looking at the collective of the human contribution and the democratization. Gosh, there's some big words today
Yeah.
on a Friday. How do we find out more?
Easiest way is just to email me directly. Email is jacob@theinfin.com. I'm active on LinkedIn, /Jacob D. Chase. Our website is www.theinfin.com if you want to learn more. And, and I'll still answer everything myself, and happy to carry on conversations with anybody who's interested in learning more.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jacob. Wish you utmost success. You are going to succeed. I love getting people on the show who are completely reshaping the status quo, doing things differently, really purposeful with the mission, and absolutely just the whole investment strategy, human contribution. It's incredible. So keep going is what I would say.
Thank you, B. This has been a really fun conversation. I really appreciate you having me on the show. And yeah, thanks again.
No, thank you. Have a nice Thursday evening. See you.
Well, have a great weekend.